You're joining us live from the Getinge booth here at the HSPA conference. So for those of you who aren't able to join, we're glad that you're able to join us by video or audio. I've got with us an awesome panel of guests here. We've got Alex Yanez, Matthew Thel, and Andy Mikas. Guys, why don't you start off by giving us a bit of an introduction, maybe what your relationship is to the sterile processing industry.
My name is Alex Yanez. I started in the surgery field about 20 years ago. Came in as a CST, worked on the open heart team for about 8 to 10 years, and then took over the sterile processing department. Been a manager ever since.
Awesome, awesome. Excited to bring your experience into the conversation.
And I'm Matthew Thel. I'm a program manager for high-level disinfection and sterilization with a healthcare system out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. So kind of similar story. Started off about 10 years ago as a technician, worked my way up to supervisor, quality assurance, education specialist, and manager, and now this position here. So, yeah.
Very cool. And Andy Mikas, so I actually started out in healthcare, started out cleaning up the operating room suite surgeries, kind of the bottom of the barrel, and then made it into a tech position and worked my way up to supervisor, lead, then a manager, and managed for 8 years, and then did instrument tracking for 8 years, and now kind of doing hospital design and equipment. So seen it from different angles, different views, and certainly happy to contribute.
Yeah, that's really great. And I'm also excited to have your representation in this panel because today's discussion is going to be about workflow optimization. And what an incredibly important topic to have and discussion to have for sterile processing. And there's a lot of aspects to that solution from the staff level, from a leadership perspective, from an equipment perspective, from a department design perspective. And so I hope we'll get to touch on all of those. My name is Bobby Parker. I've been in the sterile processing industry for about 12 years now, and the last 2 with Beyond Clean. And so I've got some thoughts on this topic as well, but I'm going to try to restrain those as moderator for our conversation. So to get us started on this discussion about workflow optimization and workflow management, just as kind of a fun kickoff, what is the worst workflow decision or worst workflow problem that you've seen in a department? Maybe one that was just hilariously bad.
I think one of the worst workflows I saw in certain departments was I saw ultrasonics on the other side of a room and the wash stations on the complete opposite side of the room. So they'd have to wash the instruments and then walk over to the ultrasonic machines, and then from there, load them up to the washers. There's a lot of traffic going back and forth.
Yep. And then the leaders wonder why that sonic never gets used,
yeah,
right?
Correct.
Yeah. right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Similar. I would have to agree. I was actually going to say the same thing, just backwards workflow, right? So ultrasonic on the other side of the room, staff having to take unnecessary steps, having to go to that ultrasonic, move case carts out of the way. So definitely sometimes that, when the facilities were built, maybe, those things weren't in mind, or, the type of growth or what equipment was going to be needed. So I can definitely agree with that.
Yeah, so. For sure. You've seen a lot of departments, Andy.
I've seen a few. To me, the worst, certainly not a linear workflow at all. And it was one of those where, you came out of the washer and there's the IUSS sterilizer sitting in front of the washer, right? And then you've got to actually cross through the sterile storage area and the sterilization area to get to prep and pack, which is actually a little more exposed. The loader room was in between all of it. So there's a lot of crisscrossing going on, right? And so that's kind of where I see really bad workflows, is there's not that linear dirty to clean movement.
Yeah. The one I was going to mention is much like that. Right outside the cart washer was the corner of their sterile storage. So these hot, wet carts are rolling out of the cart washer, and the best they could do is put a barrier up on that side of that, on the side of that rack, just to hope that it doesn't get wet. On the other side of that sterile storage, they had their prep and pack sandwiched against sterile storage, so that the prep and pack table was touching the sterile storage shelf. So if you had any moisture from an instrument, potential splash risk that direction.
Well, and then what does that do to the tip and humidity of the room, right?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely a lot of bad designs out there.
Sure.
And a need for improving them. So talk to us about just workflow challenges in general and sterile processing. Like how should this be talked about in the department? And more specifically, how do you know that you even have a problem? And I guess, Alex, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how do you start in this discussion?
I think it needs to follow the traffic of the instrument, if you will, how it comes back from the surgery. So obviously, after they're used, they're dirty. So you follow that flow of making sure it's clean. It gets, in the washer, and it goes to an area where it can be assembled, to an area of sterilization where it cools down, and then it gets stored back into the shells, and then back to surgery. So if you can follow that flow of how an instrument comes back from surgery, it's kind of like a big old circle, if you will. Starts off dirty, if you will, and it comes back dirty. If you follow that pattern, then you can kind of build your flow around that and not skip a step. It should be a step of 1 through 8, let's say, and don't try to go from 7 to 5, and that's where you're going to find your crisscross, if you will.
Yeah, and the answer that you just gave is, it seems like a simple one, like the logic of, how do I tell if my workflow is bad? Well, just walk the flow of the instruments, but that really is the foundation of it, right? And I imagine leaders, if they would commit to do that and start with their instruments and just follow one tray, not look at the cacophony of activity going on, but just look at one tray and follow it from the OR and all the hands it touches, the places it goes, and draw on the map like the touches, where it moves through the department. They might be surprised at where that thing has to travel and how many times it goes backwards in the process, and that can really peel some layers off. So that's really good advice.
So I would agree 100%. Another thing too, I'd look at, knowing that you have a workflow issue, bottlenecks, your decontam might be backed up, limited equipment, staffing. So you have that visual there, right? You can see you have that. Maybe there's some other issues, some metrics that you're tracking, like productivity. Maybe your productivity is really low. So there's a lot of different indicators that can, show that, hey, something's wrong here, something's not working. And then also, if you have visual management tools in place, if you have already, processes set up, you can, clearly see when things are out of place and such. So,
yeah. As we start talking about the solutions, I want to dig more into those visual management processes and your ideas about that. But I like what you're getting at, that one of the ways that you know that there's a problem is when you start to see the work pile up in a bottleneck. Like, okay, so it shouldn't be this way. We want our process to flow kind of in one piece, all at the same pace. And maybe we can sterilize way more than we can wash. So every day we've got this big pile of stuff waiting to get into the washer. So yeah, that's really beneficial and useful. Any other things you want to add to that, Andy?
No, I think it was great. Certainly, the bottleneck thing is going to be your number one tell, right? And so the other thing is, if you kind of talked about the whole thing from start to finish, but if you've got an IFU for a tray, time out that IFU. What does the IFU say? So it's 4.5 hours to properly time it. Now do the time study for your process, right? When it hits decontam, start the clock. Do you hit that 4.5 hour mark? And now you've got a continuous improvement, right? Where you can start measuring, okay, let's shoot for 4.5 hours. And then you start tweaking your process to hit it. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but having that measurable performance is key.
Yeah. Yeah, you're really rattling the cages now, Andy, because that IFU compliance piece of this, when we think about process optimization, is really important, because a lot of times what comes to mind first when you say process optimization is, how can I be more efficient? How can I move faster? How can we do more with less? But sometimes process optimization means maybe in the drive to meet the demands of the OR, we're taking some shortcuts. And so we've got an IFU that should be taking us 4.5 hours, but it's only taking us 2.5. And like, that's as much of a problem as it is the opposite direction.
Well, it's such a unique industry, because you want to do things as fast as possible, but the highest level of quality, and that's like oil and water, right? Like, those two things don't go together. So it's finding that balance.
Yeah, I think that's really important to think about. So as you guys have just experienced the industry, are there any kind of typical design problems or workflow problems that you see? I know every department is different, but is there maybe a spattering of problems that you're likely to see if you just step foot in any random sterile processing department?
I think it's so there's a large turnover in SPD and the OR. So I think it's when you have people who haven't worked in surgery, just started off, they don't understand the workflow process. You know, we're going this way, and they're very novice to just coming in and let me help pull a case, or you know, they start trying to touch instruments that are not ready to touch because the temperatures are ready for them to be touched and things like that. So the work on that part, it would be just a training involved to get everyone on the same page. And what we tend to forget is we've had turnover, and what we've thought we've taught, you know, to everyone, we got to go back and teach those things we taught 4 or 5 years ago, because that same staff isn't there anymore on both sides. So I think that's where there's a break, if you will.
Yeah, so just the implementation of process optimization is generally pretty poor across the industry. Not to speak disparagingly of the sterile processing industry, but maybe that's just not the emphasis or the training that that leaders in this space have. And so, yeah, getting more good practices out there of how do we keep continuous improvement going, and how do we circle back to sustain those things. We're definitely going to get to that later in this interview, because it's super important. And so I appreciate your point when I asked the question, like, what are some problems for workflows out there? Really just how we fix them is one of the problems, because we put Band-Aids over it and just pretend that it's done, and it's not. Yeah.
No, you got to get to the root.
What do you say?
You got to get to the root cause.
That's right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I would say a lot of common things I'm seeing stepping into different facilities. A really common one, decontamination area. So seeing the bottlenecks in there, case guard assembly, where supplies are located. You were talking a little bit earlier about mapping out the process, you know, kind of doing the spaghetti diagram, and it's actually amazing to see all the steps that they're taking to go retrieve supplies, leave in the room numerous times, might be that way on the preference card. And then also just, you know, look at sterilization too. There's opportunity there. You might see people that just start stacking up instruments waiting to go in a sterilizer, right? So there's just different things that you see as far as, you know, and why is that? Why are they stacking up the instruments? Do they got to go and work on something else? So things like that.
No, what you're saying is so funny. As a tech myself, like, I thought I was doing more by stacking up trays and prepping like 10 at a time, right? And then when I got into management, it drove me nuts, because the first set you started on, like, could have already been sterile and ready to go. So then I got onto my staff, like, it's not done until it's sterile. Like, stacking up 10 trays, you're not actually doing more. You're just delaying the process, right? So it's another bottleneck. But to your point, like, having things in the wrong place, right? Like, even if you've got a tracking system where your scanner is, it's not conducive to the workflow, then you've got that travel time. And that's the thing that people don't account for. So those spaghetti diagrams are awesome, because it gives you that traffic, and you can go, holy cow, like, of course they're wasting time. They're going back and forth all day long.
For sure. I'm the principle that I think is really helpful to drive that home is just let's make the right thing to do the easy thing to do, right? And not requiring something that's got an unnecessary number of obstacles to comply with it. From kind of the quality management and error prevention side of things, that applies as well. Like, the way that we create error-proof processes is by making the right thing to do the easy thing, or it's impossible to do the wrong thing. Quick side tangent here. The first time I ever saw this employed really effectively, you guys remember when chip card readers were a new thing for credit cards, and everywhere you went, you weren't sure if you were supposed to swipe it or insert the chip card because you didn't know if they had the newest technology. The first place that I saw was a Taco Bell. They put duct tape over the chip reader thing so that you could not put the credit card in there. They made the right thing to do the only option, and so you just had to swipe it, right? Now, it wasn't a very classy solution, and I think later on Panera Bread had some like cool inserts that said swipe your card instead of stick it in there. But along that line, like, if we're requiring staff to follow an extra step like an ultrasonic cleaning, like, let's do what we can to get that in the workflow so that the right thing to do is the easy thing to do. So we've talked a lot already about, you know, what are the stereotypical problems and workflow challenges and bad designs. What are some solutions? And I want to kind of go in reverse order, Andy, because you were hitting on this idea of one-piece flow, of getting it rather than stacking and batching. Like, can you unpack for us why that's a solution and what what's useful to a department about that?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about efficiency, serial processing is an assembly line, right? At the end of the day, like that's kind of the mentality that you kind of want to have. And so, bottlenecks, and especially in decontam, I mean, that's the most critical part of the department. So if you're backed up in decontam, your whole process is backed up. So I think one thing that people really need to be thinking about is their staffing model. Not just how many FTEs you have, but how many people do you have in decontam, right? Like what we did in our facility was we had 2 people at the sinks, and then we had kind of a controller who was unpacking the case cards, going off the needs list and forcing through what was truly needed and forcing those priorities through. So it was just for a short period of time, and like 2 o'clock when you're slammed, right? You just got to see a case cards. That keeps things moving. So now you've got an efficient flow, right? Because you may have 100 minor trays, but yeah, you want to get some of those through, but what about the one cardiac tray that's buried in a case cart that's the one of a kind, right? So it's getting those things pushed through, because if you address the process, then you take care of everything else.
Yeah. No, that's really useful. And I've both been a tech and managed techs who fell into that same trap mindset of like, we need to be as efficient with steps as we can to create this big stack of work and move it on through. But you're right. If some of those are priorities that need to get through, we're not actually accomplishing more as a department. Maybe that one technician has more productivity and it shows up better on their, personal productivity report. But when you zoom out and look at the department, it would run so much smoother if we had that one piece flow and everything was balanced. So yeah, that's really useful. Any other kind of call outs that you guys want to make in terms of process optimizations, tools that you found helpful for improving bad processes or bad designs in the department?
I think standardizing everything, like making sure everyone's on the same page, like how to load cart washers, how to separate things and things like that, because rely on an experienced technician to teach a new person, it's just a domino effect of not doing the right thing. So you can standardize everything to I kind of like what you said about the chip reader, only making it one option, then it'll help the workflow.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's a sensitive topic for a lot of departments, because technicians have like their own ways of doing things, and they hold on to them, and people develop these separate camps of they're the one who does it the right way and everybody else is doing it the wrong way. But when you have that high degree of variability, quality tends to suffer because you've got different processes. But to Andy's point earlier, not being able to have a consistent process, a consistent quality that matches the time expectation in the IFU, you're going to have wildly different speeds in processing. And so figuring out how to standardize that. You got any advice for our leaders out there about how to do that effectively? Because I know that's a big challenge. A lot of our listeners would probably roll their eyes and say, like, good luck with that.
So in reality, I got this from my director. Buy-in is not an option. In reality, it really isn't. We're all here we're here for the patient at the end of the day. And yeah, there are tons of ways to do a tray. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's got to be clean. It's got to be correct. And it's got to be delivered. So you might put some guards on weight liners, or someone might not, but it's still clean. So you have to have those discussions with employees, if you will. The buy-in is not an option at this point.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciated what you said about like standardizing the practice, and then the accountability comes later. I think the mistake that often happens in that discussion is just requiring it, but not having good communication on the front end of how to accomplish that. So in terms of like having a binder of standard procedures that everybody's trained on, everybody's had some opportunity to participate in and discussing what is the way we're going to do it, I think is really important in getting that buy-in. And then that accountability piece of holding it there, really important. Matt, you look like you were vibing with that last comment.
I was.
There, so.
Yeah, no, I really was. So, and then just to add on to that too, there's so much, we've come such a long way. You were talking about tools that can help the workflow process. Automation is huge. There's tons of tools out there, whether that's, your sterilizer automatically pulling in your load and then injecting it into the sterile storage, or maybe it's in your washer disinfector, and then even instrument tracking systems. One of the things we used to have to do is scan all of our load tickets that came out, for records, and now with the with the technology of instrument tracking systems, we can automate that process, right? So we can remove that, it's waste, right? That we can make that automatically populate that for the staff in there, and then put in place a process to verify that the load parameters were correct. So lots of great gadgets out there and things that vendors have, so to kind of help simplify the process.
Right. And we're recording this from a vendor expo at like the world's biggest, well, the nation's at least biggest sterile processing conference. So there's a ton of solutions out there to try to help with the things we're talking about today. So what advice would you guys have for the young, eager sterile processing leader who has these brilliant ideas about how they can improve the lives of their sterile processing technicians, make workflow and process a lot easier? Because I don't think any of us would say just go in there with an iron hammer and make all these changes. So how do you go about that process of introducing those ideas, of getting that buy-in and having that participation at the staff level?
You got to lead it, first of all, and you got to know it inside and out. One of the tracking systems we use, it's great to have one, but it's better if you know how to use it and implement it. At the end of the day, I know tons of facilities that have the same tracking system we do, but they're not utilizing the way it's supposed to be. It's solved one problem, and they're not opening their eyes or can solve 30 other problems, if you will. And it just comes from not putting in the effort as a leader to learn it and then teach it. You just can't pass the buck on that one. You have to be the expert, if you will, at what you put in as a process.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I've had some dumb ideas in my career, and so I'm just, and you just got to be able to own it. It's like, okay, guys, maybe 7 out of 10 are winners. 3 of them are gonna flop, and that's on me. But yeah, sometimes you do have to just earn that trust to go for it. But you got to make sure that you have more wins than flops, right? So I like what you're saying. Do your homework. Be the expert. If you can, test it in a small way to make sure it's going to work, right?
I'll bring in, there's techs that have far more experience than I do. And you want to talk about experts, it's them. So I'll bring, hey, this is the idea I want to implement. What do you think? And a lot of times they'll shit it down before things that I didn't even see. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Well, that's not going to work. And then a lot of times I get it. And we go from there. So to start with a small group of buy-in, and you show them the end game. We're talking about going paperless, right? Oh, that was just a mess because people did not want to let go of the paper. I mean, it was, what are you talking about? I don't need a pen, and my veterans, they were just really skeptical about it. Talk to them now. Oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, it's just like scan. It's all in there and they love it. And you talk to the new people and they have no idea what you're talking about. You used to write in records and you have to circle.
Because they started out, it was easy. They didn't have to go through the old, I remember having to handwrite everything.
Yes,
right?
yes. And looking for a set, and you couldn't read people's handwriting and things like that. So if you show them the benefits of it, it's such an easier buy-in at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure.
I would say as well, leverage your vendors. Contact your vendors, whoever's at your facility. They may have some tools and some expertise, maybe some consultative services they could help drive that change. Or even internally in your organization, you may have a quality department or a project management resource or somebody that can come in, maybe has a background in lean, right? That could help drive some of that change with the staff. So make sure that, you're contacting your vendors and things like that, and partner with your infection control too. They're a huge resource in the hospital as well. So lots of different avenues to go to help, but socializing it with the staff, laying the foundation with the staff, kind of planting the seed is huge. And not only just for your technicians, but if the change is influencing, let's say you're going to make a change in your case card assembly area. Well, you want to make sure you communicate that to all your stakeholders, right? You want to get that buy-in from your supply chain, from the peri-op domain, your instrument tech staff. So just really important socializing with that staff and, getting that buy-in.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing in those because we had just been talking primarily about frontline staff. You mentioned vendors and how they can help with buy-in. I heard a story of a department that was going through a renovation, and there was some disagreements about how we're going to arrange our sterile storage. As they came up with some options, they reached out to their vendor and got some 3D renderings done and showed those and let them do a digital walkthrough of what it would actually feel like. And all of a sudden there was consensus. Everybody realized, oh, this is definitely the route we need to go now that we can see it. So yeah, it becomes real. So yeah, leveraging those partnerships to be able to do something like that can be really powerful in moving a project along. So for sure. Any pitfalls that you guys have seen or stories that you've seen where maybe we didn't do our due diligence in getting that buy-in, either from stakeholders on the back end or particularly from frontline team members on the front end, and what kind of results that has on the process improvement project?
I think not following through, starting a project with surgery managers and just as an example, not that happens, but spraying instrumentation, all right? You saw we're going to implement audits and things like that, and then there's no follow through. So I guess follow through on what you start needs to happen, and not you're going to come across it maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now. I think you said it best, it's a Band-Aid, and then you don't want to go down. So a pitfall could easily be just not finishing what you started, you know? You're going to start something, see it to the end, whether it fails or not, you know, at least you tried it, and you have to go back to it and restart the whole project all over here.
Yeah, yeah, that's the worst feeling ever when you're relaunching something that you launched a year ago. It's like, okay, we tried it, we learned some things, it flopped. We're doing the same thing again this time, guys, but this time it's gonna stick. That is the worst feeling as a leader. Yeah, that definitely happens.
Yeah. Pitfalls, I would say what we were talking about is and I've been a part of this, not capturing all the key stakeholders. That can dramatically make or break your project. Getting the buy-in from the team. You're always going to have people, kind of the naysayers that, don't want to go along with the project or something like that. But communication's key. It's essential. And not only that, it's showing them the importance of it, right? I think data goes a long way. So when you're measuring a process, what are your key performance indicators? What are you measuring with your staff? If you're not measuring it, you're not monitoring it, right? So I think once staff, they can see that, see that they can make a change, and through this work that we're doing, it actually is, oh wow, this is improving our efficiency and things like that. So communication is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything you want to add to all that?
Well,
Andy?
yeah, so I kind of want to tie it all together because I think there's a lot of great stuff, and I think it's all kind of the same. But, you talked about, accountability. And so, I'll tap into my time, doing the tracking and working with departments on new processes, right? It's getting that buy-in from the staff, getting the feedback from the frontline staff, right? I mean, like, they do it daily. They know the challenges. They know what's holding them up. So getting their feedback on, hey, if we only did it this way, we'd save so much. Oh, that's a great idea. Getting their input, and then consistency and accountability, right? Like once you have that feedback from the key stakeholders, you kind of put that together, and now you've got the staff buy-in. They realize how beneficial it is, and now they're going, oh, wait, well, we can make this even better. And once they're engaged, man, it's a beautiful thing because they just start rolling with the ideas. You get the trust, and then it's following it up with that accountability.
Yeah, for sure. And to keep that moving, I think the accountability, the communication, the buy-in is really important. And in terms of deciding like what process optimization to put in place, I know a lot of larger organizations may have internal resources like experts at process management and process improvement, lean management, and then vendors certainly provide that as well. So sometimes getting fresh eyes is really important. And that could come from an expert, or it could come from a brand new person. Some of the best process improvements that the department that I led put in place came from people that were in their training, because they just asked questions that really cut through what we assumed to be the only way we could do it and opened our eyes to some other ideas and to make things easier to learn. I'm generally opposed to institutional knowledge of like the only reason somebody knows the way to do it is because they've been here for 20 years. Like, let's get as much information as we can, disseminate it so that it's easy to learn, easy to implement, and easy to standardize. And so, yeah, ask your brand new technicians as they're coming through, like, does anything not make sense about what we're saying? Or, could we do something differently that you think would, produce a better product? And you know, many of those ideas may be unnuanced and don't understand the challenges related to the process, but sometimes you're going to come across some real winners. And so, yeah, that can be really helpful. As we're thinking about process optimization and improving workflow, primarily we've been talking about like relocating things and maybe smarter ways to do processes, but equipment definitely plays into this because not all equipment is the same. In your all's experience, what role does equipment play in improving processes and sterile processing?
It's like 100%. One side of it, if the equipment's not working, it's devastating.
Right, yeah, you're not very efficient if you're broke down all the time. Yeah.
Hurt everything. So equipment is just reliable. But not only that, learning the equipment and troubleshooting minor things, if you will, and then teaching that knowledge to everyone that comes across it. But I think equipment is vital to the success of the department because it can make the job easier and not break people's backs, if you will, in decon and in assembly also. And I've been in many facilities where it does not look good. You know, they're still manually doing this and that. So I think equipment is really important for us to do.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the automation comments we had earlier about how that can make the department more efficient, more ergonomical for the staff. Definitely some opportunities there. Any other categories of how equipment can help our process?
Well, you think about throughput capacity, you know, think about your washer disinfectors, you know, how many trays can you put in there, right? Do you have the right equipment mix? What about your ultrasonic types of services that you're doing and things of that nature? So going back to automation, there, you know, technology is available where, you know, staff can clean at the sink and they'll be able to load their washer rack and have it delivered right down to the washer disinfector. So there's so much unnecessary movement and waste and a lot of fatigue for the frontline staff. So there's so much great technology available that really simplifies and cuts out the steps for the staff. Some of that redundant, you know, waste in the process.
For sure. And Andy, we've talked about this a couple of times before about just equipment capacity, but what's your thoughts on following up on Matt's comments about equipment capacity, like how leaders should think about that in terms of creating an efficient process?
So I think the old school approach was, you know, we want capacity, right? Like we want to be able to get as much in as we can. And I think, you know, as sterile processes evolve, the thought of efficiency, lean processing is, and so I think, you know, the shift from throughput to from capacity to throughput is kind of happening. So you want to be able to keep things moving. Right. So I think you need to get away from capacity and focus more on throughput, because we go back to, you know, if you've got a huge sterilizer and you got to load, you know, 50 trays, you got to wait an hour and a half to load that thing. Right. If you had a medium chamber sterilizer that could do 16 trays, like you're pumping those together, you're midway through your second load by the time you hit the first one. Right. So you become more efficient with that throughput versus capacity. I think that's kind of the mindset people need to have.
But we're Americans, Andy. We want the biggest version of it.
Well, I know,
right?
but we need to be real here.
That's right. No, that's really useful as you think about like balancing the workflow. I remember the department that I was a part of in Louisville. We went through a renovation, and the old washers that we had were double wide, so 2 wash racks would get loaded in there at the same time, and the cycle was a full hour long. And so what would happen is there would be this big lag time of getting both wash racks all the way full, load them up, have them wash for an hour, and then what would happen on the clean side is this wave of work would get dumped on them when they've been standing around tapping their foot for 15, 20, 30 minutes waiting on it. And so the workflow in the department was full of peaks and valleys, and what we really needed was that level line, that balancing of our equipment to keep the process moving, keeping everybody with a set in their hands. And when we went through a department renovation, we switched to equipment that was just, you know, what you would typically see here, 1 washer rack per washers. And so we still ended up with only 4 washer racks, where we used to have 2 washers with 2 racks each. We had 4 separate machines. And the cycle time was a little bit shorter, but just the benefit of being able to get that machine started when you had one moving through was really helpful. The other thing that we learned from that experience is when you have the big sterilizer that loads 50 trays, like what Andy's talking about, that takes up a lot of footprint in the department, right? And so it doesn't feel good maybe to go with a smaller option that is more reasonable to your workflow. But often when you do that, you're able to recapture some of that footprint. Whereas instead of having 3 big sterilizers, maybe you can have 5 small ones or something like that, to where in the end you achieve the same capacity but have better throughput through that, if that makes sense. And so I think it's a really helpful way of thinking about, how do we balance our lines so that everything's working in tandem and we don't have a bottleneck of work piled up because we're way over equipped in one area or under equipped in another, and are able to move it through. I think that's really useful.
To that too is that I was at a facility the size of 2 of the larger sterilizers. You might be able to get 4 of your smaller sterilizers in there. So you have that built-in safety when you have we all know autoclaves go down, right? So you have those additional, sterilizers
got that
available.
redundancy.
Yep. You do. So you have that built in by going with a smaller option. So I agree with the comment, bigger's not always better in those situations.
For sure. So we've talked about design, we've talked about equipment balancing, and we've teased data. But I think data and analytics has a lot to do to help us with workflow optimization. In your all's experience, how can we be better leveraging data, whether from tracking systems or stopwatches and timers, in order to better our processes in the department?
Using data on the sets that are needed and directing staff to do that instead of the sets that are not needed. In my experience, techs will easily gravitate to the easier sets that probably aren't needed for a week or 2, if you will, instead of approaching or doing the sets that are constantly needed all the time. So if you put that data out there, I see that, Al here tends to do more batteries than anyone else and things like that. It can help direct them. Oh, okay, I understand we should be doing the sets that we need for the next day and so on. So that data, you put it out there for staff and they'll gravitate to it and they'll understand, but it also holds each other accountable, through their peers, if you will.
Yeah, and the fact that you said put it out there for staff is huge. People want to be involved in the mission of the department, but if they don't have anything to work towards, they're going to gravitate towards what's comfortable, what's easy. But when you have that data presented in a good way to the team and talked about, where they can see that and they can see like what percentage of priority trays are we processing, and really make it kind of the mission march of second shift of like, we're only going to touch priority trays, and have some of that peer competition and peer accountability going, you can accomplish something really special. So yeah, that's really important to me.
No, I agree. I think your instrument tracking systems can provide you really important data and what you're feeding your instrument tracking system, right? So, all your scans, you think about your decontamination, your instrument assembly, your sterilization. So extracting that data and looking at that and going, wow, this is our bottleneck in decontam. We know cases are breaking at 9 a.m. and it's busy up until 6:30 p.m. Maybe we need to readjust our staffing model and have an extra person in decontam. So it's huge. So without having that, yeah, you might not even know what the issue is or can't put your finger on it.
Yeah, so just to touch on that, right? So when you're talking about tracking systems, you talked about kind of the peaks and valleys. So as you're looking at those data points in your spreadsheets, right, you can see like, okay, here's our peaks for assembly, here's our peaks for decontam. And so you want to see those line up, right? Like you want to see like, all right, our assembly is peaking here because we're breaking out of decontam, or our cases are breaking here, so our decontam scans are climbing here. So you should see that like decontam climb, assembly climb kind of succinctly. And if you don't, that's telling you right away, like your staffing model's broken. You don't have people in the right place at the right time. So data's huge, man. And then if you go to the leadership, right, data talks. And if you can't just go to the C-suite and say, hey, we need help here, we need new equipment, we need new this, we need to do that. They say, well, show us the data, right? They want to see numbers. And so that's where having that scan compliant, having that data to show is going to get you where you need to go.
Absolutely. It's not an uncommon analogy to see sterile processing as being a manufacturer, right? And our product being delivered to the OR as our customers. We talk about the OR being internal customers all the time, but Andy, what you're getting at is also seeing the OR not only as the customer that receives our manufactured product, but they're also our supplier. So a manufacturer, they've got to get the steel in to make the car frame to send off to Ford to go make their cars. But we have more of a circular workflow where the OR is our supplier of raw material, which is used surgical instruments, and our consumer of our product, which is sterile surgical instruments. And so thinking on the front end of that, of our supplier is going to deliver us our raw materials at certain intervals and times, that should instruct us on how our staffing is, and looking at those curves like you're talking about, because we don't need 7 people in at 6:30 in the morning if when the OR wheels out report is showing that surgical instruments are being delivered to us ramping up really at 10:30. And so I think one really simple piece of data that our listeners could implement is go to their OR business manager who can pull together like a wheels out report from surgery and put the numbers together for that of what does the curve look like on a typical day for instruments arriving in sterile processing, and then just raw number of people we have scheduled in SPD. Does it follow that curve? You know, like that's super basic, and all the awesome tracking systems and the analytics that are out there can go way deeper than that. But for those who don't have it, like that's a bare minimum that's really useful. Do we have people in place at the time the instruments typically show up? And yeah, just unlocking that one thing could be really powerful. Mostly we've been talking about process optimization in terms of how can we get more done, but there's also a staff satisfaction component to this, right? In what ways have you seen process optimization really improve team morale, or maybe even team retention of being able to keep people in a department?
This is kind of new, we started an incentive program at our hospital. So in this incentive program, if certain markers are met quarterly, there's an incentive they can all get, if you will. So in joining with surgery, we have started producing data on, if you will, errors, and using that data to help educate staff on what we identified the 4 biggest errors when you're assembled sets. So in reverse, when we do audits, hey, so-and-so hasn't had any errors in like just 6 months and things like that. And on the other side, staff wants to know when they make a mistake. They want that feedback. As much as you might feel they don't want that feedback, they want to know if they missed something. And it's very common to miss things. The number one thing is probably an indicator, right? But if you don't tell staff what they're doing wrong, then don't expect changes also. So the satisfaction can come from, it's kind of weird telling someone they're doing something wrong in reality, just as well as telling someone that they haven't been doing anything wrong. And we post that monthly in our lounge, how many sets and error ratios and all that stuff. And there's a sense of pride, and staff member. I've had many staff members come to me and say, my goal is not to make a mistake all year. And of course, the back part of that is the incentive program. Yeah. So
I love that that's being tied into the technician pride and their enjoyment. When we think about process optimization, kind of the caricature straw man that comes on in the picture in the back of our mind is the bean counter who's trying to crush the sterile processing technicians into powder to get as much productivity out of them as we possibly can. But that's not the mission, right? Leaders ought to be coalition builders, getting people excited about, we are going to be the premier sterile processing department in the city, in the region, in the nation, and really building some excitement around, let's have our processes be as efficient as possible, as high quality as possible. Let's deliver the best product that we can. Let's have the fewest OR delays related to instrument late deliveries as possible, and getting people excited about that and being something that they're proud to tour their administrator through the department. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like, let's get more work out of these blasted sterile processing technicians, right? I love that you're making it a part of an incentive and a point of pride for the technicians.
Oh, I agree. I think that's fantastic, and I think it's imperative, that, you're getting the staff buy-in, you're implementing this new process. So it's really important to share with them the outcomes, right? So say, hey, look at, we were able to, reduce this much waste and improve our quality. Sharing them with the quality rates is look at what you're doing, So I think it's really important to share that with them and keep it visible,
Yeah.
One of the things that I did was I thought it was important to get as many people into the department as we could, right? And so one thing we did was we would have surgeons come in and do in-services on the impacts of missing instruments in the room, right? Like what they deal with if something's missing or an indicator's missing. And so that gives staff the perspective of the OR, right? But the stipulation was you now have to field questions from sterile processing, right? So the surgeon does his thing, and then the staff are like, well, why can't the surgical techs get all the instruments in the right tray? Right? And so now the surgeon goes back to the room. It's like, put them in the tray, right? Like now he's an advocate. So I think getting that part of the stuff that staff don't see, right? The folks in the OR and build, because you said like, they're a customer, but they're also a partner, right? Like you said, get the wheels out time, but they're measured on turnover time, right? So what's going to help them get instruments quicker? Having the instruments back, right? So that's pre-cleaning. Point of use cleaning and getting that buy-in. So what are the replications and decontamination? So I think it's just getting the two parties talking. And now staff understand what's going on in the OR, but they also know the OR. And you build that kind of partnership. I think that's huge.
Yeah, there's nothing better than that first step of either a SPD tech in the OR watching a surgery or like a surgeon coming down to SPD and just getting wide-eyed about all the complex things that go on, because we tend to simplify it in our minds. I'm toured a lot of people through sterile processing departments, and they're just like their eyes roll back at the cacophony of noises and activities that are all going on all at the same time. But it's well organized. It feels like chaos, but it's all driving to a particular purpose. And when we build those kinds of collaborative relationships and have understanding of one another, it really opens those doors to have those types of conversations about pre-treatment and transport of trays and delivery and case carts and all those kinds of things. That's really great.
You said it. And I see people, they schedule these walkthroughs with leadership, but they do it at like 7 a.m. when there's nothing going on. Like, don't do that. Do it at like 3:30 when there is chaos, right? So they can see what's really going on, because I see that too often.
You hit the nail on the head. Too many times I've been in that situation where you're bringing administrative leadership through a department, say, hey, we have a problem, but they come and it's like a tumbleweeds rolling through the department.
Drinking coffee in the break room.
So I really think that's a huge thing. So talk about going to the Gemba, going to where the work takes place, right? Getting those leaders to come see it in real time. So
I agree. And your comment about like the 8 people sitting in the break room drinking coffee, if I were to ask you guys, like, what is the one challenge that's really facing and that the industry is facing right now, the one that's just wrecking sterile processing departments across the nation? I'm sure all 3 of you would say staffing, right? It is impossible to find and retain good staff. How does this process optimization conversation relate to that staffing crisis that we're facing as an industry? Like, how can this help? Have you seen it help in that particular conversation?
Staffing is an issue, and it got worse with COVID. In reality, I mean, it's a desert right now, and a lot of people are turning towards traveling. So I've learned when employees, travelers, even when they come to our facility, and they see it well organized, and I almost get the same question: how many people are on that night shift? How many people work in decon? How many days do you work in decon? Things like that. It kind of gives me a sense of, where they came from or what they're dealing with. And when they see a good workflow, if you will, optimization, they buy in, real quick. Oh, maybe this is a place I'm going to settle at where, just work here and stuff like that. So you use that, you can use it to your advantage, use it.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of 2 parts. One, we want to make sure that we have a, quality, right? Quality's at the forefront. It's paramount. The other part is efficiency. So we talk about staffing and, how the industry, we're seeing a lot more of it, a revolving door. We're seeing less people coming in and staying 20, 30 years, seeing less people leave after 2 years, right? So how are we, what is that strategic approach going to look like? We all know that there's a lot of waste in sterile processing. So when we talk about process improvement, how can we simplify it for the staff and make it easier for them? And one of the other things too, we talk about bottlenecks. We talk about sterilization loads and throughput and things like that. But education and training is a huge one too. So you think of that, and staff satisfaction and staff retention, and that's a huge gap in the industry right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about like process improvement. Obviously, you're fixing your process to identify, is it a staffing issue or is it a process issue, right? And so if it's process, then you fix it. But if it's staffing, then to me, you've got to go back to the root cause, and that's where does your staffing come from? And I think that's kind of the knowledge gap. There's a lot of managers out there don't know where their staffing comes from, and there's a department that has an algorithm that plugs in the data that you send them, and that spits out how many FTEs you have. So is that measurement accurate? Is that the right measurement? And I think that's, after you've dealt with the processes and you've dealt with the equipment, you're still like, okay, we need more people. Now you got to hit, where your FTEs are coming from and understand what that measurement is, right?
That measurement's never right, Andy.
Yeah, very rarely is it right.
That's right. It's so hard to truly capture what sterile processing does from a productivity standpoint, so I understand why it's never right. But there are some standards out there that are absolutely bananas that have nothing to do with what we do in sterile processing.
It's a challenge because there's so much that goes into sterile processing, and you want to capture all of it. But then, the management engineerings of the world are going, well, wait, we just need to be able to plug in a number or two numbers. We don't need like 800 numbers. And so it becomes that challenge of understanding like, what's critical, what number makes the most sense, and what's going to give you the best outcome for your department, right?
Yeah, it's so important. One of the pitfalls around this conversation that I've seen a lot of departments fall into, and I was a victim of the same thing, is this mindset of, gosh, we are understaffed, we're drowning, we're really busy. I don't have time for process optimization right now, right? Because it takes work. You will go slower in learning a new process, testing new ideas, moving things around. It feels less safe to try something and not succeed at it. And so we go into this protection mode of, we are too busy. We're gonna hold off on those optimization ideas until we get our staffing up. And I don't know, I always told my team, like, if we ever do get fully staffed, like, hold your breath, because something bad's about to happen. It's like, that's just how it goes, Like, not many sterile processing leaders get to say, like, we've been fully staffed for 2 years now. It's not a reality. So, any experience or advice you guys have for like how to carry out those process optimizations in the face of like big workflow challenges with extra trays left over and staffing shortages and all of those things, and the relief that comes on the other side of it?
You gotta not think the same. Easiest way to explain it, just because it's always been done like that doesn't mean it has to be done like that anymore. So things have changed, and you have to change with it. You really do. Whether that's growing your own staff members, whether that's just getting people who have never walked in this department and training them to get them certified, you got to start changing, because those days of being able to handpick, having many interviews for one position, and you had a day shift opening, which was very enticing. Those are gone. So we have to adapt. And if you just got to do the work, even though you're not staff, you just do the work and you just bite the bullet, if you will. It'll pay off in the long run. So you got to play the long game at the end of the day, just to survive, I guess.
And it does hurt in the short term.
Oh yeah, you'll see quality issues rise off the bat. People are not going to be happy, but little by little it'll change, and just let us stick with it. And at the end of the day, where the long game, if you will, or 6-8 months from the long, it'll pay off, and then you can move on to a new project.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing about process optimization is, it maybe feels like in one step we're saving 5 minutes, right? And all the challenge and the effort of going through establishing that, putting the training out for it, defining a new standard workflow for it, is it really worth it? But you get to reap the dividends of that for years on every processing. So even if it costs you 20 hours to get it started, eventually it's going to be hundreds of hours of saved time over the course of years into perpetuity. So I like that. Playing the long game is definitely the mindset we should have. Guys, we're getting close to time to wrap on this, but I want to make sure that we get this last piece in here, which is about how do we sustain that improvement? Because if we're not intentional about that, we're going to find ourselves always coming back to the same project a year after we launched it, and it's no better. So what have you guys seen that works well for leaders to be able to sustain that improvement in the long run?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to consistency and accountability, right? Like, once you've got the buy-in, once you've got the process implemented, now it's just, okay, now we're going to walk away. No, you got to stay on it, continuous improvement, continuous monitoring, and rounding on your staff, right? Like, 6 months in, hey, how's it going? Like, can we make it even better, right? You've got to continue to engage the staff. You can't just say, oh, it's great now, that's it, and then just hope that it continues to get better. Like, you got to keep checking in on it and have that consistency and accountability.
I would agree with that. Too many times there's implementation of some process improvement initiative, and I think the key is measuring, right? Always go back and measure. Just because if you implemented it, it doesn't mean that it's sustained, right? And I think that's where, again, we're talking about pitfalls, is you're not continuously measuring that process. So that's the key to success in that area. So controlling that process to sustain it.
Yeah. Measure it, post that data, put on when you started it, and show the curve of how it improved. And then when the improvement's shown, print it off, show it to your administration team, and brag on your team about it. Because I guarantee your team thinks that they're awesome, and you tell them that they're awesome, but put some data out there that shows them, my team is awesome, and celebrate them. And that's really important.
Absolutely.
I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, sustaining that improvement is super important. It starts with that buy-in, because team members are not going to they're not going to maintain a process that they had no voice in deciding what the process is going to be. And so yeah, if you've got that buy-in, and then as we're talking about processes, I think it's useful sometimes to have a process for process optimization. You put some audit records in place with frequent, certain specified frequencies of how often I'm going to come back and check on this, or have your supervisors do check-ins and just pop in decontam, watch them wash one scope, and see if it's following the new flow that we established, and just have them turn one in every 2 months. That seems and maybe feels like micromanagement, but if the team understands the spirit of this is we're going to be the premier sterile processing department, and we're going to do it the right way, and they see the data that this is the efficient way, this is the way that results in the best product for the OR, then they'll welcome and be proud of the fact that they had an excellent on their review of that process. So, yeah, putting something in place to keep it sustained. Guys, I want to give you one last opportunity to kind of have your final word about what advice you would have for our leaders out there in terms of making their processes more efficient in the department.
You got to believe in it. I mean, you really have to. It's a passion. It's unfortunate that they will never get the glory or the thanks that the surgery team does or the doctor does. It's being able to serve your community behind the scenes, if you will. They'll never know how many people they've affected, by doing that trade that helped establish, the surgery. And as a patient, you're nervous. You have tons of things going through your mind. You don't have to, you don't even have a clue that you're worrying about, I wonder if my instruments are going to be okay. That never crosses your mind. And they'll never know. They'll never be thankful as everyone else. But as long as you know that you are benefiting the community in that way, and if you have the passion and the buy-in, it'll work out at the end.
I think going back to the comment earlier, leveraging your internal resources, you're not alone. So that would be one advice I give. Go to your infection prevention department, go to your quality department, go to your peri-op, go to your surgical leaders, show them the data, say, is there any resources? And you'll be amazed. And then going back to even your vendors may provide services for you. They can help illustrate that and kind of put that together, and to be able to help you share that, that initiative with senior leadership.
I think two things come to mind for me is, one is, do your assessment, right? Understand what your challenges are, understand what your solutions are going to be, and then kind of weigh those out, prioritize them, right? Like, what can I implement that's going to have the biggest impact with the less amount of work, like the least effort, right? Start there, get a small win that's a huge impact to your process. Now you get some engagement, right? Some buy-in, you get some momentum. I think that's one thing, like really prioritizing the changes. But then two, like going to a local chapter and networking with all the other managers that are there and understanding what challenges they have, right? What are they doing? Like, network, talk to other managers, right? Like, I think it's unfortunate when you go to a local chapter and there's like 15 people there. There's 800 SPD techs within, 4 hours. Like, where are they? Like, as a new leader, go to the local chapters, talk to the other managers in your area, network, and start building that, because that's where you're going to get your solutions. I mean, I've been coming to these for a long time, and I'm still learning from guys that I've met, right? So you got to tap into that network.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's what's beautiful about what's going on in the industry right now in terms of this digital revolution. We are far more connected than we ever have been in terms of sharing ideas, sharing solutions, sharing problems. There are some forums online that, frankly, sometimes are a little scary when you read on there and ask, like, what are people doing to solve this problem? And some of the answers, like, I would not necessarily recommend doing that. But at the same time, people are having those conversations, and that can only mean the betterment of the industry as a whole. I love that. Get involved in your local chapter, and ask for an invite to go tour and see for yourself with your own eyes, and you'll see some creative solutions out there. Guys, thanks so much for participating in the conversation. I love the different backgrounds that we all brought to this conversation. We can only improve more from having those other perspectives. So I appreciate you guys pitching into this conversation on workflow optimization. So with that, we'll wrap, and I'll just encourage our listeners out there to get in the game. Be looking for opportunities to improve processes, be more efficient, and then with that extra time you have, just invest it back into quality. Keep being better. So until next time, keep fighting dirty.